Anytime you beg another man to set you free, you'll never be free. Freedom is something that you have to do for yourself.
I just finished this video. It's a really long one. I recommend you adjust the playback speed, increase the playback speed, you'll get through the video faster.
Okay, day 21 just wrapped up. It was really interesting today. We got to see 4 different lawyers from COPA side and from BTC Core and the devs team. And then we saw Lord Grabiner give most of his closing arguments at the end of the day. He thought that he was going to have time to finish them all, which was quite surprising to hear because he only had maybe an hour and a half left or something like that. I didn't note the time when he started. I should have noted it. But he went through most of his closing arguments pretty quickly, which was surprising. I was expecting Craig's team to take most of their time to give thorough closing arguments, but I think it's a reflection of how confident they feel. Now, there was quite a bit to this day, so I'll probably chop this video up. There'll probably be a couple pieces that I'll have to piece together here. So just jumping right into it, when Jonathan Hoff started off the day, he took over and he started asking about the cryptocurrency paper that Craig had been confused about. He insisted that there was no cryptographic proof of Craig ever possessing Satoshi's keys, and that the story about destroying the keys in the hard drive was hard to believe. He insisted that Craig had failed to provide proof of transactions from early blocks, which kind of contradicts what a lot of us thought has been happening, where the Kleinman addresses that were listed by Craig in the Kleinman case, or rather the Bitcoin addresses that were listed by Craig in the Kleinman case, have been moving and selling coins, but it wasn't mentioned today at all. Let's see what else went on. What went on here? He talked about the Gavin Andreessen signing session and insisted that the Electrum software could have been spoofed, and that Gavin Andreessen could have been fooled, that he's human, and that as any human, he's fallible. And despite being an IT professional, he could have been fooled. He referenced the inconsistencies made in Craig's testimony and then tried to say that due to those inconsistencies, he couldn't be Satoshi. That was something that I really noticed with the closing argument from COPA. It really focused on inconsistencies in certain statements. Very little of it was concrete. You can point to inconsistencies in statements, but there was, for a lot of these, justifications, and a lot of the points that they made in their closing had been addressed, I thought, rather convincingly throughout the trial proceedings, and they kind of made their closing arguments as if those convincing explanations just hadn't been given at all, and really just kind of reiterating their case from a perspective that I think personally they really just put forth this whole trial to keep the Ponzi going as long as possible. I think that their closing argument was drafted in a way to make it seem like they have a more convincing case than they really do. And I think one of the larger purposes behind that isn't just that that's how the game of court is played, but it's also the need to compel the wider public opinion that this trial is going to be won by COPA and that Craig has no chance of winning. But I think that it's quite clear now that Craig does have a very good chance of winning. I'll get into that a little later. I now believe that there's about a 90% chance that Craig will win this. That's my assessment from this point after watching today. Significantly increased the likelihood that I'm projecting for Craig to win. I'll get into that in just a moment here. So, also talked about the early Bitcoin transactions that Craig couldn't remember or recall accurately, the payment to Zuko, and the upload.ie website not being held on that server but through a different one. He insisted that no one else, or he talked about how Craig had insisted that no one credible had come forward as Satoshi, but they said that many people had. And that really wrapped up his case. I mean, he ended by stating that Craig was wrong or ignorant of details that Satoshi should have known, that the real Satoshi would have known. But there was something really off with Hoff today. Just watching his performance on the first half of his, I guess the first half of his closing arguments today was really weak. And he didn't seem to have a flow yesterday. He was very professional. He had, it was a long, drawn-out day of him talking, but he had a good flow to his presentation. He presented the information well. Today he seemed to be stumbling over his words quite a bit. And there was someone whispering to him that, I didn't notice this before, but I guess his statement was prepared, and one of the other lawyers on his team was whispering to him that I guess he missed a portion of it. And he just seemed sort of off his game today. I thought he did a great job yesterday, and an absolutely terrible job for the first half of the day today, that he had coaching from other lawyers on his team as he was giving his closing arguments, that he missed certain things, just I guess that he maybe skipped too far in where he was reading from, and they made him kind of go back and read certain statements out. But he was being coached, and I wasn't expecting to see that almost, that he was being coached from other members of his legal team. But the judge, when he was done, had only a few questions for him. He wanted to know if they were seeking like injunctive, that they sought something as injunctive or declarative relief. And it was clarified that it was injunctive. But he also wanted to know about how far he should go in acting on tulip trust or issues, how far he should go in ruling on issues relating to the tulip trust case, which is one of the pending cases. And the dev team and COPA's team really wanted the judge to act on as much as he could, whereas Craig's team insisted that the judge would only be appropriate for the judge to act on the details that were fully examined in this trial, which were the MYOB issues and the abacus issues, the abacus material. So I guess the agreement was that only that would be acted on by Justice Miller in this case towards the tulip case. When the dev lawyer took over, it wasn't super surprising, the arguments that they were going to make. There's three things that they really focused on in terms of knowledge that they said demonstrated Craig couldn't be Satoshi, and his inability to explain the unsigned integer, the check block function, and the proof of work algorithm as described by Adam Back. Now, early in the testimony, that dev lawyers said that there's a difference in how each team wanted to approach addressing that Craig isn't Satoshi. The dev team wanted to make the case that Craig had insufficient knowledge of Bitcoin to be Satoshi, whereas COPA's team didn't want to make their case around the argument that Craig lacked knowledge of Bitcoin. And I thought that was kind of revealing that COPA really didn't want to make the case that Craig doesn't understand Bitcoin and didn't want to rest their case on that argument. I mean, Craig is very knowledgeable in Bitcoin, so I understand why COPA wouldn't want that and why the devs do. I just thought it was sort of revealing to point that out explicitly in their closing statements. There was some relevance to it and what Gunnar was discussing at the time that he mentioned this, but I just thought it was weird. He went on to talk about anachronisms in the PGP key, the altcodes being disabled that Craig should have known were disabled by Satoshi. Specifically referencing the opt2 mal or mal. He went on to talk about the PGP key as well. He talked about the PGP key and that Craig had only stuck his neck out a few times. He said that when he accused Craig of trimming his evidence to known facts about Satoshi. and that he wouldn't stick his neck out very often, and on the few instances where he had stuck his neck out to insist what Satoshi may have known in certain instances, he was wrong about them, and that the two instances were when he was discussing the Zuko payment as a rare example of him sticking his neck out, that he alleged that he'd sent money to Zuko. But I mean, it's really just one man's word against another. There's no real proof that that did or didn't happen. It's completely just Craig's word against Zuko's. And then there's the PGP key not being a signing key. He alleged that that was the other piece of, or the other instance where Craig had stuck his neck out. Then he went to talk about the mining inconsistencies as well, that the early mining shouldn't have required 69 or 70 computers, and that they didn't believe his explanation that those computers were working on other tasks as well. He went on to talk about white paper must have been created in open office, not in LaTeX. He went on to talk about the LaTeX demonstration that they put forward before the court and insisted that those changes were proof of him creating the forgery. Essentially, that it was him working the document as a forgery and not as a demonstration, and insisting that it wasn't evidence, the changes and that were done and the timestamps on them weren't indicative of a demonstration, but of someone creating a forgery. He went on to describe that Craig must have used the Auspos software to recreate the white paper, and that this was done, and that was his method of essentially creating this as a forgery. He went on to describe that there's three features of Bitcoin: the unforgeable timestamp aspect of it, the cryptographic digital signatures, and the use of wallets. He went on quite a bit to talk about how Craig's claims to using Citrix and the way he used it was very unlikely, if not impossible, and that the clock manipulation described by Madden was a more plausible explanation for what they saw in metadata. He pointed out that Craig's inability to use the Satoshi PGP key or demonstrate sufficient knowledge of it was proof that Craig isn't Satoshi. And he casted doubt on Craig's working environment, that Craig didn't work in the environment as Craig described, and that his overly complicated environment was an exaggeration, and that it wasn't something that he took seriously. That's pretty much what he implied in his statement anyway. And he ended his closing statement by taking a jab at Craig and kind of trying to just insult him directly by calling him Satoshi Quakamoto, or Quackamoto. After he was called Satoshi Quackamoto, there was a new dev lawyer that took over, or BTC Core lawyer that took over, and they were talking about the case that pertains to Coinbase and Kraken and BTC Core, and they're kind of just doing some housekeeping about how they really just requested that if Craig is deemed not to be Satoshi in this trial, that they don't want the pending cases to move forward, regardless of a pending application to appeal, which I thought was a bold request to say that regardless of if there's an appeal pending, they still want the other cases to be withdrawn. And I don't think that'll be granted. I think it's obviously something that they would request with the expectation that they probably won't get it. But I still thought it was a bold thing to request at all. There's actually two lawyers that came on. There's only one gentleman who was on briefly, and then there's a woman who was on. I thought she was quite smug. There was one point where she said that Craig had never been involved in any sort of Bitcoin development, and that he'd been attacking real Bitcoin developers by bringing these lawsuits against them, which I think she was holding back laughter because it was something that even she knew was just totally full of shit. To say that this guy has not been involved in any Bitcoin development whatsoever, and really just discounting all of his patent filings as if they're non-existent, and not pertinent to Bitcoin or blockchain is really disingenuous to a point that I mean, there's a reason why she was holding back laughter when she said it. That was the most interesting thing from what they said anyway, was just that little point. So Lord Grabiner took over after this, and again, he said that he was going to just request a short break and then he would probably wrap up before the end of the day. He didn't quite make it. There's a little bit that he's going to have to go over tomorrow. I'll speculate at the end here about what I think that might be. But he said there was 4 main arguments that he wanted to make in his closing statement, or rather there was 4 main topics that he wanted to discuss in his closing statement. Number 1 is a general overview of the case. He wanted to give a general overview of the case, and then he wanted to talk about proof sessions as number 2. Number 3, he wanted to talk about Patrick Madden. And number 4, just some miscellaneous issues that he wanted to discuss about the case. I took some very detailed notes here because I thought that with it being so condensed that I would want to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I've got about 5 pages of notes from about the hour and a half that he was presenting his closing arguments. And just all in all, I thought he did a very, very good job of presenting Craig's case. And there's a reason why I'm a lot more confident now in how I think this outcome is going to go to Craig. I really do think that the scales tipped quite a bit today in Craig's favor. And really, I'll get right into why. Forgive me, I'll have to read from my notes quite a bit. So, just giving an overview of the case, he said his cross-examination of and the quality of the evidence and competence given by Craig kind of speaks for itself. That it's been disclosed that he has Asperger's, and in spite of his long cross-examination, he maintained his composure and did a great job on the stand. That he demonstrated the skills, knowledge, and qualifications that would be expected of someone and had education in the relevant disciplines to make him familiar with all of the very specific details that would be required to put together a system like Bitcoin. He said that there was proof that Craig had a long-term interest in the evolution of digital cash, and that there was a long history backed up by witness statements that he had been discussing various forms of digital cash that had existed before Bitcoin with various people, and that various people had attested to that fact. He talked about how he had shared a draft of the Bitcoin white paper with Stephen Matthews prior to the issuance of it. He pointed out that COPA's case was built around pointing out discrepancies in certain testimony and ignoring all of the evidence that there was more common ground, that there was essentially just ignoring all the evidence to the contrary. And this is where I thought it was really interesting. In Lord Grabiner's defense and closing arguments today, he pointed out a lot of things that weren't said by COPA or by the dev team. And it's something where I wasn't quite sure how they would approach their defense today. I knew for certain that COPA would make their case around the inconsistencies and the discrepancies in certain testimony, but I was unsure of how Craig's team would close off. Like I said, I thought there might be some discussion of moving coins out of the Genesis block. I think that might just be a backup. It could just be an unknown. We'll have to get closure on that at some point. I'm sure it's going to come out who sent those coins from Binance to the Genesis block. But that didn't come up at all today. There were certain things that Grabiner laid out in their closing argument that COPA didn't try to attack. Now, the other day we had COPA say that they were going to go after Craig for criminal prosecution, refer Craig to criminal prosecution for essentially perjury and trying to mislead the courts. It sounds like tough talk that COPA is trying to like be extra harsh with Craig, but there are several instances where they actually didn't do that at all, and it's almost suspicious where they didn't do it in some cases. Like they could have made fraud allegations against Craig in certain instances, but it's almost certain that they would have known that the threshold for alleging fraud had not even been met yet. So they didn't even bother. And not only did they not bother to allege fraud in certain instances where they implied that fraud had been committed by Craig, they didn't outright ask him about it on in several instances where they had the opportunity to do so on the stand. And there was instances where they could have recalled him to the stand to get further explanation when they didn't. And that was very telling. Like I said, COPA and the dev team, they were pointing out inconsistencies, whereas Grabiner's strategy here was to point out that there was lots of things that COPA, it would have made sense for them to go after Craig for, and they just didn't. And it's almost suspect that they didn't. So I'll get into that in a bit here. He said that they had ignored that there was work Craig had done for QDOS Bank about a logging system that couldn't be altered, and that he'd presented QDOS Bank with a decentralized peer-to-peer payment system. They didn't press that issue with Craig at all. That he had embedded code for online poker into the Bitcoin code was something that was indicative of Craig and his work with online casinos. He cited Craig's patent portfolio with 4,000 patents as proof of his prolific knowledge and understanding of blockchain and his just prolific nature as an inventor. Now, there was a few points where he was interrupted by Justice Miller. One such instance was here where he was asked for the date of the first patent filing, and he wasn't able to produce it when he was asked, but he said he would provide it later. There was someone who stated that it was in 2012. I haven't verified that yet, but that's what someone reported in the Twitter space shortly after, I believe. He stated that Craig's work on making Bitcoin scalable in a way that was described by Satoshi is evidence of him being Satoshi. And really, I think this is a very strong argument. There's so much new information, like the Marty Malmy emails strongly indicate that Craig is doing what Satoshi wanted to do with Bitcoin. And there's a lot of uncertainty in this case around a lot of the evidence, and a lot of the testimony is hearsay. It's just one person's word against another's with allegations that there's some sort of deception happening. The real anchor, like someone posted it earlier, I'll put it on screen here. That's the anchor in this case. It's what Satoshi said between public forums and private communications that's now available paints a very strong picture of the type of person Satoshi was and his plans for Bitcoin and how to scale it. That's the only thing in this case that's 100% certain, that they know Satoshi said these things. All of these things that are the certainty in this case point to it being Craig. That he's scaled Bitcoin in a way described by Satoshi is further proof of that. And it's a really, really strong point because it's the only anchor in the case. But it really paints a strong picture that if it wasn't Craig who's Satoshi, he sure is doing exactly what Satoshi wanted to do with Bitcoin. And he seems to be the only one doing that because everyone else is trying to take Bitcoin in another direction. I mean, BTC Core certainly is. I mean, the strongest indication here to the judge that something wrong has happened and that Craig is very likely telling the truth is that BTC is so different than what's described in the white paper that it can't be used for the fundamental purposes it's listed as being created for in the white paper. And I know a lot of people online who are just looking from the outside, they really discount this fact that Craig's the only one taking Bitcoin in the direction that Satoshi made it quite clear he wanted to take it in. I mean, the strongest point of evidence points to Craig. And that's your starting point. That's just where the arrow is pointing at the beginning of your journey here to try to find out who Satoshi is. I think there's a very strong case for Craig winning this as we go further along through Grabiner's closing arguments here. So let's just see. He talked about the Mike Hearn emails and the Marty Malmy emails specifically as evidence of this, and that he wanted large blocks. And he goes on to talk about how the devs with BTC took Satoshi's intent and turned it into something else that he had never meant for it to be, that they found ways to make Bitcoin anonymous when it was never meant to be used anonymously. And the design was supposed to be set in stone of the protocol, and adherence to Bitcoin's core design and Satoshi's original vision and Satoshi's intent for Bitcoin is further proof of Craig actually being Satoshi. And this is really true. A lot of these emails were released just recently, but Craig had been saying these things for a long time, and it reveals a unique insight into Bitcoin's foundational goals, that Craig had unique insight into what Satoshi had actually intended Bitcoin for. And there's so much debate it's not debate. There's so much dialogue that's just ridiculous about Bitcoin because people have this misconceived idea of what Bitcoin is supposed to be. A lot of us were, I wouldn't necessarily say psyoped, but we were tricked into assuming that Bitcoin was meant to be anonymous initially. I know anyone who was in the Bitcoin space early on, the selling feature of Bitcoin for a lot of us was that it was supposed to be anonymous online money. And that was never the intent of Bitcoin. It was quite clear that it was supposed to be an honesty system, and a system of open and transparent ledger that couldn't be altered. So we were just completely sold a lie. It was a completely false marketing tactic by people who wanted to take the project in a different direction. And to be very fair, they succeeded. But I digress. I'll get back into what he was saying here. He went on to argue that there's no serious contenders to name themselves as Satoshi. And he went on to say that COPA has long demanded, or a lot of people have demanded from Craig that he move or sign coins. But he pointed out, if there was someone out there who was Satoshi but didn't want to come forward as Satoshi publicly because they wanted to stay behind their pseudonym and not be known publicly, that they could sign, and they could sign in a way that was maintaining their anonymity, and they haven't done that. And that's a very strong point to make, that can only really be countered with the idea that Satoshi might be dead and that he can't sign because he's passed away. And really that makes it quite a limiting factor, that you have to assume that this guy hasn't come forward yet because he's dead. He went on then to describe the signing sessions and saying that there was a procedural issue with what Mickeljorn had put forward in her witness testimony, that she stated that she hadn't intended to mislead the court, but she very much had, and that there were certain assertions that she made that were completely unwarranted, and her interpretation of certain things was very much unwarranted and indicative of her lack of independence. That she described certain things in a way that were just inappropriate to describe in the way that she did if she was approaching this from the perspective of someone who was independent, and really just nitpicking at how she had described a signing session as a casual interaction, whereas it wasn't, and calling into doubt certain things that were obviously beyond doubt given the description of them in the statement that she'd made. Talking about how Gavin had sent for a brand new laptop to be purchased and that he opened it from a sealed box, but she pointed out weird things that like he hadn't explicitly stated that he'd checked for factory seals. It's like, come on, he just went out and bought a new laptop and opened it up from a sealed box. Like, you don't need to explicitly state that. And really just nitpicking at the words that she'd used in instances where it indicated that she wasn't truly objective. And really, it was a good point. He did a really good job of discrediting Micklejohn on the stand and discrediting her testimony after the fact. I thought he did a great job. He really stated that the idea that Gavin would have been duped when he sent for a brand new laptop and would have insisted on watching the process was kind of insulting to Gavin, that anything that could have possibly been done to subvert the process would have been done in front of him and he would have recognized it. He made it quite clear that these signing sessions were authentic and that nothing was done to subvert the process because Gavin would have recognized it. Now, they said that after the Micklejohn testimony, it was weird that they didn't want to cross Craig after that to get Craig to answer about the potential ways in which he had subverted the signing process. But I think beyond that, if they had questioned Craig about it, they wouldn't be able to just imply it slyly and let it try to slink by. There was a lot of things that they were trying to do that, where they were trying to make these insinuations that were almost inappropriate. And I think yesterday there's a question Lord Grabiner had asked about whether certain information was in a docket. It's because they were referencing material that wasn't really brought up in the trial yet. And it seems like someone brought that up on Twitter. I'll put it on screen. It seemed like Justice Miller was getting frustrated with Jonathan Hoff for referencing material that wasn't in their docket and wasn't really brought up before the trial. So it seemed like he was scolding them for that. Anyways. And another thing that they conveniently ignored in the case was that they didn't address the deposition of Gavin Andreessen and the specific statements made by Gavin in his deposition. And then he quoted some certain things where Gavin insisted that he truly believed he hadn't been fooled and that they'd conveniently ignored that fact. The next thing he covered was Madden. So he started off very respectfully, stating that he held no ill will towards Mr. Madden and didn't mean to insult him in any professional manner or capacity, and had no doubts about his professionalism as an expert. Something along those lines anyway, just generally just offering a statement of recognition and respect towards Mr. Madden, pretty much before just eviscerating the guy. That's my take on it anyway. This guy pretty much just flat out everything that I expected him to say about Mr. Madden, that Mr. Madden allowed Bird and Bird to create his report and that he should not be allowed to submit this report, and that really I think the case that he made is that the court cannot accept this report from Mr. Madden, and that all of his report and all of his witness testimony pretty much has to be stricken. That was what he requested. He asked for all of it to be thrown out. And I really think that he's going to get this request granted, and this is why I think Craig is going to win with a high degree of certainty now, just because without the Madden report, it really swings the the probability of Craig being Satoshi towards Craig's side. He started off by saying that he didn't want to cast blame on anyone or towards the way the proceedings were arranged, but that it may have been the case that Mr. Madden would have required more time to deal with all of the information, and that certain processes could have been done differently and had been improved for the sake of giving him more time, but due to circumstance, they hadn't. And it was maybe unfortunate for him, and he gave some recognition towards Mr. Madden that he may have been a little bit rushed. But in spite of that, the quality of his work was insufficient, and that the quality of his work didn't meet the threshold to be admitted as evidence. And he talked about procedurally the things that were done weren't appropriate to the case, and saying that because this wasn't done procedurally in a way that is relevant to the case, that it shouldn't be admissible in this case. And that alone is a great point, but there's so much more to it than that. He talked about the 50 forgeries that had been identified, and how Craig had to respond to the allegations of forgeries. He said that Mr. Madden wasn't truly qualified enough to even discuss a lot of these things, that he lacked certain qualification, although he was certainly an expert. He wasn't an expert qualified in all of the matters discussed. And the thing that he really drove home was the lack of independence. That he had at least 8 meetings with Bird and Bird, and that one would sort of be called into question, but having 8 or more and really insisting that there was and that there must have been more is a really strong case for throwing this out. And then he went on to insist that because of all of these procedural irregularities in having Bird and Bird draft his report and finesse his report according to his own words, and meeting with them on 8 occasions when saying that he had never had interactions or meetings with lawyers in any other case where he'd worked as an expert before, and that pointing out how unorthodox this was to have so many meetings with Bird and Bird. The argument that he made is that he went on to describe the very specific criteria for being listed as an expert in the court. He doesn't meet that criteria anymore because he had so many meetings with Bird and Bird. And they're really saying that because of those meetings, you have to take away everything that Madden's done here. And I really think this is going to be granted. I think they're going to strike the Madden report from the case. I think Craig's going to win as a result. I think he's going to win handily as a result because of how heavily they've relied on this report. I mean, he said he was completely biased and he wasn't being objective in the way that he drafted the report by allowing Bird and Bird to draft so much of it, and to allow him to have so many interactions with Bird and Bird just rules out the possibility that the courts can even accept him as an expert witness. It's not that he's requesting it, it's that he doesn't meet the court's criteria to be accepted as it, and by the court's own criteria, they have to throw it out. And I really think that that's the circumstance. I could be interpreting what he said incorrectly, but I'm quite certain that that's what he's saying, and I'm quite certain that the courts are going to have to interpret it the same way, and they're going to have to do just that, and they're going to have to strike the Madden report. And this is a really long-winded video because I wanted to get a lot of detail into this. Yeah, I really think this massively bolsters Craig's case. If Justice Miller grants this request to strike the Madden report, it's a done deal. I think Craig's won. But there's more to it as well. He didn't quite finish. There's still the miscellaneous section. I'll get through that as quickly as I can here. So in the miscellaneous section, he covered the admissibility of the various statements in Wright 11, which is one of Craig's witness statements that was put forward. And he said that COPA cherry-picked what they wanted to accept as admissible, and that it was unfair not to allow a large portion of Craig's witness statement as evidence because he's directly responding to allegations of forgery, and that it would be unfair for him not to be allowed to address those specific allegations. The judge interrupted here. The judge asked if there was a redacted version of Wright 11 that had been agreed upon and submitted, and there seemed to be some uncertainty if that had been done yet. But they said it would be provided if it hadn't. He talked about during the cross-examination of Jenkins that COPA's lawyers had explicitly asked if he'd been sent a copy of the white paper, but they didn't press for any details, and that Mr. Jenkins was instructed only to answer the questions he was asked, and because he was told to only answer those questions and not provide extra details, pretty much when he was sworn in, that he had held off on mentioning the Timecoin document that was shown to him because it came up under cross-examination or re-examination, that it came up when Lord Grabiner was questioning him that he had been given a copy of the Timecoin paper prior to the issuance of Bitcoin, which is significant because, I mean, if the judge believes that story, then it goes to Craig. I mean, if you believe that he had a copy of the Timecoin paper before the Bitcoin white paper was published, then he has to be Satoshi. He said when Dr. Wright was recalled, they didn't accuse Dr. Wright of priming Jenkins. They didn't accuse him or level the accusation against Craig of having prompted him to mention Timecoin, which I thought was quite telling. Why didn't they level that accusation against Craig? I mean, at the end of Jenkins' testimony, they insisted that he was lying, that he had been coached by Craig or had the name Timecoin written down on the paper he had in front of him before he came into the room and spoke with him and gave his testimony. They flat out accused him of that. So why didn't they accuse Craig of having done the same thing? It's quite weird that they omitted that from their questioning of Craig. If you're going to accuse Craig of coaching him prior to him going on the stand, why not level that allegation against Craig? Again, it was something it went totally over my head that they hadn't done that. So it raises a lot of questions about why they wouldn't. Very strange. The judge pointed out here that he still had questions about why Jenkins didn't mention Timecoin in his witness statement, and that he only mentioned it on the stand. They went on to talk about the Mike Hearn evidence, Mike Hearn's testimony, talking about how he felt like Craig couldn't understand or describe Bitcoin when he was questioning him about it. COPA made the case that because Craig couldn't describe it in this conversation that they had over dinner, that it was proof that he wasn't Satoshi. But even according to Mr. Hearn's testimony on the stand, he said that there was discussion about not talking about certain topics due to pending patent issues. There was material they were discussing that was pertinent to different patents that they'd been filing. So due to that, Stephen Matthews had insisted that Craig not talk about certain things. So that was the justification for why Craig couldn't clearly and concisely answer questions that Mike Hearn was asking him about Bitcoin. Now, COPA alleged in the trial that there's a lack of witnesses coming forward and saying that Craig is Satoshi and that there should be more people coming forward. And Lord Grabiner's explanation for that was exactly what happened to Gavin Andreessen, pointing out how when Gavin Andreessen came out in support of Craig, that pretty much his life was ruined. He was almost certainly threatened by certain people. I don't know if he actually said that. I mean, I'm going to say that he was probably almost certainly threatened by people. But he stated that he was pretty much kicked out of BTC Core for saying that he supported Craig and that he believed Craig was Satoshi. And really a lot of people started shitting on him after that. So I mean, that's why a lot of people won't come out and support Craig, because they know there's a consequence for that. And the consequence for that is they'll try to destroy them, and they'll try to ruin them in whatever way they can to keep their Ponzi going. At least that's my perspective. Let's see here. Yeah, he said that Gavin was excommunicated. He went on to explain the BitHub objections that Satoshi had, and that they were kind of misrepresenting that. He talked about the 1996 book that Craig had published that completely contradicts the idea that he wasn't working on electronic payment systems, because in 1996 he published a book called Computer, Money, and Something on Electronic Payment Systems. Sorry, my notes were a little messy here. Yeah, Computer, Money, and Something of Electronic Payment Systems. Sorry, Computer, Money, and the Creation of Electronic Payment Systems. I think that's what it was called anyway. My writing is a little sloppy there. He went on to talk about Craig's involvement in early Bitcoin and his involvement in mining Bitcoin early on. He talked about the latex document and how the allegation that it was created in OpenOffice and not in latex was misplaced, and attacked that assertion by Craig's team, by COPA and by the dev team. Also, he clarified Craig's position on this. It's not that that is the document that was used to create the Bitcoin white paper, but it was not that those specific documents were used to create the Bitcoin white paper, but that those specific documents could be used to recreate the Bitcoin white paper. And that was their intention of submitting those documents, that the latex document isn't the document that was used to create the Bitcoin white paper. Rather, the files on that BDO drive could be used to create the Bitcoin white paper the same way that Satoshi did. He also presented a manuscript document showing that the Wayback Machine showed that the pad that Satoshi had written, or the document that Craig had submitted, which COPA said didn't exist until 2012, they found on the Wayback Machine, someone had submitted to the courts a Wayback Machine capture of a URL showing that pad for sale in 2009. So at least in 2009, that pad was for sale. So that pad of paper that COPA had alleged couldn't have existed at the time Craig said he'd written on it, did indeed exist at that time. Lord Grabiner then went on to attack the developers' written closing, that in the closing statement of the developers, they were making statements in their closing as if they were assertions by experts when no expert had made those assertions, and he accused Mr. Gunning of assigning himself as an expert in making these assertions in his closing written statement. And yeah, it was a good catch for sure by Craig's team to recognize that they were making assertions that were unfounded and unproven and unargued about in the court thus far. And almost certainly it'll justify getting those portions of the written statement rejected. Or at least I suspect that's how it might work. Procedurally, again, I'm not a student of law, and I'm unsure of how procedurally those things actually happen, especially in UK courts. Well, I guess we'll see. And really, that's where they ended for the day. There's certain things that Lord Grabiner didn't get to talk about. I'm certain he's going to talk about the Kristen Agger-Hansen stuff and the allegations of what happened with Kristen Agger-Hansen. I'm pretty sure that he's going to explain a lot of why Craig's team didn't want to use their own expert. I believe that will come up when he discusses the Kristen Agger-Hansen incidents. And really, I'm curious to see what notes he chooses to end on tomorrow. It seemed like he didn't have a lot to get to. He offered to continue going, but the judge insisted that he had to get somewhere. So he couldn't allow him to continue going. But really, I think all in all, it was a very, very good job of addressing the key details. I mean, comparing the closing arguments from COPA and the dev team to the closing arguments of Lord Grabiner, I feel like Lord Grabiner was really trying to win the case in his closing statements. I really do feel like COPA, I feel like they went into this case from the very beginning knowing that they weren't going to win. And I really believe that this whole trial is an exercise in them keeping their Ponzi going a little bit longer. They've got BTC at its all-time high right now. It's going to keep pushing up. They know this. They know that the vast majority of people aren't paying attention to this court case at all. And the vast majority of those who are on their side. And they're believing the narrative that's being spread throughout the majority of the crypto space that Craig has no chance of winning this. But again, my perspective on it is if Craig gets the Madden report removed from evidence, he's almost certainly going to win. And I don't think the court even has a choice based on the things that Mr. Madden in his own testimony said. I think the court actually has to take his testimony out and his reports and just completely remove them as evidence. I think their hands are really tied in this instance, and I think it's quite clear that they're going to do that. I'll be shocked if they don't. But really, I'm so excited for tomorrow. I'm sorry this is a long video. It's going to take me a while to edit this. There's probably going to be lots of cuts that I put in here, so I'm sorry if it was a little choppy. But yeah, I was really excited. I wasn't expecting Craig's team to even start today. I was expecting the devs team to eat up most of the day and for Mr. Hoff to take a little bit more of the day than he did. Yeah, I guess everything's going to come to a close tomorrow. So I think tomorrow's going to be our last day. Then we'll see how long it takes for the judge to make a verdict. People have said that it could take 2 or 3 months for him to render a verdict, that he could deliberate for quite a long time. I think he probably will deliberate for longer than, I don't know, a couple weeks. But again, if the Madden report isn't admissible as evidence, he might be able to render a verdict fairly quickly without that, because without that, there's very little to COPA's case. And yeah, there's a lot that's attributable to Craig as evidence if you can't discount these documents as forgeries. So I'm really excited to see how Lord Grabiner finishes tomorrow. Again, my suspicion is that he's going to talk in depth about Kristen Egger-Hansen and the role he played at tainting a lot of the evidence in the trial and tainting Craig's case just in general. I think he'll argue that he was acting perhaps as a double agent from the very beginning, that he was an infiltrator into nChain who from the get-go sought to discredit Craig's case. I think that's what he'll say. Just my speculation. We'll have to wait and see until tomorrow. Again, sorry it was a long-winded video today. I'll try to make a nice, concise video, but I wanted to get as much detail into this one as possible because, I mean, it's the conclusion. This is where it's all coming down to now, so I'll make a really good video tomorrow. I'll make it nice and concise and as detailed as possible. So stay tuned.